Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. Thank you so much for joining us. On the show, we just like to talk about anything Indy real estate investing related. We are Indy investors talking Indy real estate, and that's what we're going to do today. My guest today, he's done a little bit of everything from Airbnb to buy and holds to fix and flip to wholesaling some properties, even selling some properties to me. So we'll get into a little bit of that today. And with that, let's get on with the show. All right, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. I got my buddy Mihir joining me here today. How's it going, buddy?
Hey, Brian. Good to connect with you again.
So it's kind of funny. You're one of those people that fall in this category too of like, hey, I feel like I know you pretty well just from like Facebook and like we've done some deals, some interactions. But
Yeah.
I think we've only like been together like in person like maybe like 2 or 3 times. So it's always funny when you have those connections.
That's right. Yeah. So I think the very first time I connected with you was when your company would host the investor-related meetups back up in Carmel area, I believe.
Yeah.
So I showed up to one of those before I even had a property, before I even got into real estate, just to get an idea of what's going on. So that's the first time I saw you there.
Yeah. So, and that's something that I would definitely want to dig into you with, of just like kind of how I feel like you're great at like networking and connecting with people and stuff like that. But let's get into that a little bit later. Right now,
Okay.
I'd love to like just hear a little bit about you. So why don't you tell our audience just a little bit about yourself? So kind of your background and then how you got into real estate investing in general.
Okay. Yeah. So I was born and raised in India. I moved to US in 2010, just exactly about 10 years ago, to do my grad school in Cincinnati. I'm an electrical engineering major, and once I got done with my grad schooling, I moved to Indiana for my job to work in Columbus, Indiana. When I first got a job offer, it said Columbus, and I got excited, thinking it's Columbus, Ohio. But later on, realized it's Columbus, Indiana. Close enough. But about 5 years ago, I moved to Indy, bought a house here, and pretty much after buying a house, I accidentally like house hacked without actually knowing that I did by doing Airbnb where I stayed. I bought a 4-bedroom house, so I Airbnb 3 of the other bedrooms that I'm not using. And one of the things that I realized while doing this is, and during this time we had meetups in Indy related to Airbnb. And one of the guests mentioned, hey, if you have pets and if you advertise them as your Airbnb mascot, you could actually deduct their expenses. And I'm like, this is a cool idea. I didn't even realize you could do that. So I did that. I put up pictures of my cats, and lo and behold, like a bunch of people just started booking my place because they're like cat lovers. And then I could write off expenses for the cats, which I thought was crazy, but it was pretty cool. And around the same time, I was talking to my mom about what do I do with all the money that I've saved up for my job. And she's a big time investor back home in India, in my hometown. So she has condos in downtown, and she owns quite a few land. So she was thinking, how about you try the rental market in the US? And that's the very first time I even thought about real estate, but I didn't quite understand where to start or what to do. So that's when I started looking up some meetups to go to, and that's where I came across your meetup and Steve Richards' meetup. So that's when I started attending these events, and just to get an idea of like what is going on or where do I start.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's pretty much how I started.
No, that's awesome. So, and I love that. And that's it's one of the reasons we do the show, and one of the reasons we do the meetup. And I know Steve does his meetup and Sairi does their meetup, is for all these little things, these little tidbits that you can pick up. Like I just got a nugget from you of that. If you put like pictures and stuff of your cats or dogs probably on in your Airbnb and did it that way, you could actually expense some of that stuff. So that's I didn't know that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I thought it was really cool. Like I didn't even think that that's a thing.
Yeah. So,
but yeah.
That is funny because I just like knowing like you over the last couple of years of like some of the stuff that you put out, like how you'll like have your cats in it and things like that. I'm like, oh, you just make sure like cats, but no, you were making some money off of it. So I like it. So that's good. So let's talk a little bit about kind of just just you being in real estate. So you said your mom over in India has some real estate and kind of turned you on to that a little bit. So as far as like you here in Indianapolis, like so I know. So you've done the Airbnb, you were house hacking before you even knew what house hacking was or anything like that. So, but you've also had, you have a rental portfolio as well. And so let's talk about that as well. Let's just kind of talk about this rental portfolio in general. What are some things that you've just kind of learned as, hey, I'm going to buy this property, I'm going to hold it, I'm going to collect the rent. Is there anything that you, I guess maybe that you've learned from like, oh man, I didn't know about this. I made this mistake and I've kind of learned from this. What's something that kind of stands out for you for just as from the buy and hold standpoint?
Uh, it's funny you mentioned that I network really well, but I thought I didn't network well enough because when I first started, what now seems like common sense to me, I didn't realize getting an inspection is like that big of a deal. Now I look back and like, what was I thinking?
Yeah.
So the very first step for me was to like make sure the inspection is always good to go. I do the walk around, and I'm pretty good at spotting stuff, and and that's how I started. Like just walk around properties and spot what's wrong, just factor that in my offer, and I bought my first few rentals. But later on, the very first rental I bought, I got hit with a basement issue. That was a pretty expensive fix.
Yeah.
So that pretty much drilled it in me to always get an inspection. So
Yeah.
that would always be the number one takeaway. Um, the second one would be obviously the numbers uh, and the location. So location is you kind of have to know what's going on in that area. But at first, one of the lessons that I learned later on is, instead of buying a property uh, with the money that you have, you can always leverage more and buy a property that'll get you in a better spot. So for example, if you only have 60K and that puts you in like a D area, maybe use that 60K towards down payment on a better property in a better area rather than trying to get what you have, because that's not always desirable.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So what are some of the things that, and you're local here in Indy, so you definitely have that advantage, but when you're trying to figure out those areas of like, hey, this is where I want to invest, or this is where I want to have a buy and hold versus this, or hey, I'm okay putting a down payment in here because I know the area is going to be worth it. How do you go about like kind of choosing and selecting kind of what's right for you to fit your numbers?
Yeah. Previously, the lazy way that I used to do is take the girl that I was dating to that area, and if she steps out of the car, I think hey, that's a good area to buy. But
That's funny. No, that's true. That's actually how I sometimes I describe people when people are like, how is this area? I'll be like, well, I wouldn't let my wife walk down the street there,
yeah, yeah,
but I would be okay walking down the street. So I consider that maybe a C plus, or
yeah.
So that's
So
kind of
when
how I
I
described it. Yeah.
when I lived in college, I lived in a pretty rough area, so I'm kind of like not really sensitive to certain things that people obviously notice sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that used to be one of the checks. But I think the good rule of thumb is, if you're close like a checks and pawn shop or something like that, or the liquor store where there's people just chilling there all day long, right? That's
Yeah.
something that I would not buy anymore.
Yeah.
I did buy something like that when I started.
Right.
Yeah, but then I came across a website called city-data.com, which tells you the general demographics of that area, so you could see what the average income is and who lives there or so on, right? So that gives a general idea, but nothing really beats driving around and kind of just get a feel for it during the day and at night.
Yeah, great resource right there. City-data.com. I know Neil Bawa is somebody we've had on our other Simple Wholesaling podcast. Like he uses that a lot and does a lot of education on how you can use that. He's more of a multifamily investor, but he
Right.
also shows, you can do a single family and stuff. So
Okay.
take a look at that. Also, I know like it's kind of funny how you said the girls that I used to date. I like how you put that used to because you use them as a pawn to like see how good the areas. No, I'm just kidding. So no,
They serve their purpose, right?
right. Yeah. So that's good. No, so I mean, it's something that, you hear that all the time of just like, hey, when it comes to real estate, like what's the most important? It's location, location, location. That's 100% true.
Yeah.
And knowing kind of what you're getting, knowing where you are and what you're going to be able to get out of that for your numbers, I think is a great tip that you threw in there, Mihir. So I really appreciate that. So I do want to kind of go back to, we're talking about the inspection thing. And when you were, if you started buying properties, 5 years ago, I feel like when we're buying properties, even like 3 years ago, 4 years ago, it's a different thing now of like, oh man, I do need to get an inspection here. Or where 3 years ago, I was like, prices were okay. And I just kind of let it go. And prices have gone up so much now that like, you can't afford to make mistakes sometimes. And so those inspections are super helpful. You have to be able to do them. Have you noticed that transition of like, just because prices have risen so much and like values have gone up so much that like every little bit helps in so much that you have to make sure you are getting those inspections and stuff?
That's a really good perspective you bring. So, I mean, if I miss something, right, if it's a $4,000 repair, it still stings on a $30,000 property.
Yeah.
It's still a pain, but I did notice how the prices went up quite a bit. So my first property was towards end of 2017. I closed it in December. So it's about 2017, 2018. So you could buy a lot of properties like 30, 40 grand in the same area that are now like 80, 90.
Yeah.
So if you make a mistake, the effect kind of like magnifies now.
Yeah.
But in general, I think for me, the inspection is crucial now because it kind of automatically builds me a checklist of what I need to fix when I go in. So it's not just like a litmus test whether to buy it or not, but also where do I go from here once I get the inspection, right? How do I do the rehab? What are some of the items that I need to fix up front so I don't get, dinged for it later on?
Yeah. How did you go about finding an inspector that you were like kind of you were good working with? Did you try out a couple different ones, or how did you go about that?
Um, when I didn't know anybody, I just called the first guy that I used to inspect my primary residence because he was my go-to guy. But I
Yeah.
very quickly realized he's not for like an investor.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do like an investor grade inspection. What he does is like general lengthy scope, where he even points out the doorknob is crooked or something like that, which I don't really care about.
Yeah.
So I was then referred to another inspector through a local real estate network, and he does. I basically give him like 6 or 7 items that I want to get looked at: the electrical, roof, basement, um, probably the plumbing, right? So he just takes a look at that, and then he just gives me, hey, is this yes or no? If he says this needs repaired, then I just make a note of that and then factor that in my price.
Yeah. Nice. No, that's really good. And just a little shameless plug in here for our next episode of the Indy Investor Pod is actually going to be with with an inspector,
Okay.
Neil Perry. So that's a good little intro into that.
All right.
But no, I think that's really important of what you just brought up there of like, hey, there's a difference between like people that are used to working like kind of the retail side as an inspector or the investor side. It's the same thing if
Right.
you work with a realtor. Like, are you working with a realtor that's only used to some of that more the retail market, they're doing listings and stuff like that versus someone that is, working with investors and used to working with investors. So those things are super important. So no matter who you're working with, no matter what you're doing, make sure the person that you are working with is like, hey, have you done this before? Are you used to this area? Are you used to doing this for investors? Those are all questions that you should come up through those conversations and stuff. So,
yeah, my story with the realtor is also very similar to that of an inspector.
mm-hmm.
It's the same deal, right? Because even though we're dealing with the same product, the nuances are different for investing.
Yeah.
So with an agent, I had the same story, right? So she would take me to all these like nice homes and nice areas, and I'm like, this is not going to work.
Yeah.
Like, what is wrong with buying a rental in Carmel or Zionsville? I'm like, I want cash flow.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's just knowing what people are. And we talk to people all the time too, of just like especially in the rental market, when you're looking for property managers or somebody that's used to doing property management in like Broad Ripple or Carmel or something like that,
Yeah.
it's gonna be different if you're in Brightwood or, over on West Indy. So knowing that they're familiar with the areas, just like you said, it makes a big difference. So asking those questions in the front end and making sure that, hey, these are my expectations. This is what I'm looking for. Like putting that stuff out there is super important. So,
absolutely.
let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about like you flipping properties then. So you've done the buy and hold thing. You've also flipped some properties and stuff. So what are some things you've learned through that process of, is it even the same type of thing of like, hey, looking for contractors. Okay, I need contractors that are used to, working on investment properties or knowing like, hey, this is going to be a complete gut job. Or so what are some things you've learned through when that process of just flipping a property and getting what you need out of that property?
So buy and hold comparatively is a lot more laid back. The amount of rehab that I would do for a buy and hold was a lot lower. So I know a lot of investors now do like the BRRRR strategy where they want to be all in at 70% or 75%. But when I was buying my rentals, like that was not my criteria. As long as cash flow and had good future potential, I would just go ahead and buy it. And the rehab was very minimal. So I never had the need to go search for contractors. It was pretty relaxed and laid back, and I was enjoying it. And then I accidentally did a flip, which was not my intention at all. So I bought this rental for $55,000. We put in, the property manager actually helped me do some rehab, and he put in like $7,000 or $8,000 into it. We could not find a tenant for it over the winter. So I just decided to list it on the market because I was not really making any money off it. And that got sold for close to 120. And I kind of like, a bulb just went off, and I'm like, hey, what if I do this a lot more often? And that's kind of, it was pretty sweet. It was a pretty good payday. So after that, I tried buying a few properties pretty much in that similar ratio, the price range, the rehab, and the sale price. And that's when I realized I need to have rehab crews, because my my PM would not do that rehab
Mm-hmm.
if he's not managing it. So I asked around. I got a few referrals. A lot of them did not work out. Either the guy, and I didn't really have a good vetting list. I would just go in trusting the person without really like vetting them out thoroughly. So that's something that I've learned over the years, like not do that.
Yeah.
But the referrals came in very handy, and one of my and just really talking about real estate in general with my friends and coworkers, they sent me to this one guy who's like my lead GC now, who takes care of most of the rehabs, and he subcontracts it.
Nice.
So
So
yeah.
that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit about that, because I feel like you've done a really good job of positioning yourself and building a network and building like a good group of friends that you can kind of like lean on, ask questions to. And so how important has that been for you to have, people that you can reach out to and, ask the tough questions to, or can maybe even keep you accountable and stuff like that. So what does that network really mean to you?
It's true what I say. Your network is your net worth. So I really value the friendships that I've developed over the years. Be it people, the investors that live in Cali or the investors that are local here. I think for me, surrounding myself with the right group of people is everything.
Mm-hmm.
So, you have days when there's like a 10 grand repair and you're just like, why am I doing this kind of thing? Right. And that's when, you see messages from your friends in the Facebook group, or, you get text messages from the other investors saying, hey, I did this. And that's a good motivation.
Yeah.
And they offer in the 2 cents, and the next thing you know, you're back on track and you're buying more properties.
Yeah. And that's what it's all about. Like kind of getting that motivation from other people, like you said,
Yeah,
but then also being able to ask them questions and being able to kind of say like, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Like, what do you think about this? And having that network of people, I think is just so invaluable. Then also making sure that you're like giving as much as you're receiving and things like that. If you're
absolutely.
asking questions, like you need to be able to like kind of reach out and help as well. And so, yeah.
So actually, to answer that point, I go back to your meetup again, because before I knew anything about how to run numbers or anything else, I used to go to your meetups and also Steve's meetups, and
Mm-hmm.
you guys were really patient in answering my questions. So I was probably one of those pain in the butt guys who ask you like the really, really annoying questions. And, I remember you taking the time to answer all of those, helping me. And even about a couple of years ago, I attended one of your newer meetup at the Zaria building. And I asked you about, hey, how do I negotiate with a seller, or how do I go about that whole seller conversation? And you took time out to, explain all that, which always, I'm thankful for.
Yeah. Well, thank you, man. I appreciate
Yeah.
you. And yeah, thanks for saying that. So I think it goes back to, as I'll put my old teacher hat back on here of like, there really is like, if somebody in that room is like thinking about a question,
Yeah.
like you're thinking about a question, go ahead and ask it. Cause I guarantee there's other people in that room are thinking the exact same thing and stuff. Now I won't go as far as saying like, there's no such thing as a stupid question. Cause I've heard,
there are quite a few. There are quite a few.
So there is something to be said for, if you're sitting in a room, especially with other investors and things like that, like don't be afraid to, ask that question, because somebody else, might be in that same boat. Actually just finished reading a book. It's called Getting Naked by Patrick Lencioni. And it's all about being vulnerable and just like kind of basically it revolves around this consulting company. And basically this consulting company was super successful because all they did was they just went in, they were super vulnerable and just asked any and every question they could think of. And they really got to the heart of everything that their investors were, or their businesses were looking for, because they asked just all the questions possible. And I think it goes a long way into when you are, working as an investor. I think there's a lot of times, I think when I started off, where I was like, oh man, I can't ask that question. I don't want to seem stupid, or I don't want to seem like I don't know what I'm doing.
Right.
But all those little questions, they add up and they can cost you money down the long run. So when you are, hiring an inspector, working with a broker, working with a contractor, you need to ask any and every question you can think of, because more times along the line, that question you didn't ask is going to come back to bite you in the butt somewhere. So I think
Yeah.
that's super important.
Yeah. And I've been lucky enough to have the kind of friends in business
Mm-hmm.
where they're comfortable sharing their losses, I guess, or lessons.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, I know everybody on Instagram shows all the glorious aspects of real estate. Hey, look at this cool door that I painted. But it's also a grim side of things that not many people are comfortable sharing. So those lessons learned that we share with each other, and their vulnerability is actually what helps each other grow. So if we fail at something, they're not afraid to share that with me.
Yeah.
And we do the same thing, like with our friends, and that really helped.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love that. So, let's kind of go back to, so I know you have kind of like wholesaled a couple properties to us and things like that. So when you're going about kind of having those conversations of maybe you end up getting a lead or, buying a property that oh man, I don't really want to buy this, or I don't want to hold this, or I don't want to flip this, or whatever it is. What,
Right.
what are some things that you've learned along those lines of like, hey, I can go ahead and still sell it and still make some money, or I can still, through my network, I've, now have reached a lot of people that maybe do want it that I can't, if I can't take it, somebody else will want it too.
Yeah. So when I first started investing in real estate, I didn't really realize like how many different avenues that are there. So my only purpose was buy something that'll cash flow. That was my one mission, right?
Mhm.
And the more I met and networked with people, the more I realized, hey, this is not the only avenue. So that's when I started, attending your meetups and realized, hey, I could actually go direct to seller rather than go through a realtor and only make offers on MLS deals.
Yeah.
So once I started going direct to seller, like that opened up a whole world of opportunities. And it was both good and bad because it got really overwhelming really fast. Uh, and that's when I decided to do some of the other wholesaling stuff, because there are investors who do not have access to some of the deals that are direct to sellers. So if that's not something that I have the capability to take down, or if I don't have the bandwidth, if I don't have the funds, or if it's just something that I'm not willing to do, I realize there's always somebody who's wanting a deal. If it doesn't meet my criteria, it doesn't mean it's not a good deal, right? There's always somebody looking for something.
Yeah.
So that's where the network came in, and I realized, okay, so wholesale is one avenue, and even if I bought a property to flip, but the margins weren't there, but I still wanted to make a profit, I did a wholesale on, I think I had 6 wholesale projects this year,
Nice.
and all of them were like very, very minimal rehabs. I didn't go all out on spending the money on it, but it still made a decent profit. So if I could make a quick, 5-10 grand a month by just, doing new flooring, painting, then put it back on the market, I think that's a pretty decent win.
Yeah. So I love that method. I think it works great and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So no, good advice. So I do want to ask you though, man, you seem pretty busy. So you said you just did 5 or 6 wholesales. I know you've done some flips in there. You have your buy and hold market. So how are you doing this as you are still working a 9 to 5? So how is that possible? Why
Yeah.
just quit your job, man? Just become a real estate investor. What's that like? How do you do that?
It's I I had a lot of people tell me that I should just like quit my job and like jump into real estate, because there's a lot going on. There's a lot of opportunities, but I think it's that sweet paycheck, that the consistent cash flow that keeps coming in. It's hard to cut ties with that. But one thing that I'm really grateful for is the people that have helped me, like especially just me. It's not just the investors that I surround myself with, but also the two. So basically my full-time GC, like he takes care of all the rehabs. He takes care of maintenance costs for my rentals. And I hired like a part-time person who does most of my contractor coordinating, uh, checking out, scoping out properties, and then getting the bids and so on, right? So it's not just me, but I have 1.5 headcounts that do what I used to do. So that made my life a lot easier. So
Yeah.
all I do now is just swing by every once a week or so, because my job is not just 9 to 5; it's more like 9 to 9. So
Yeah.
it's a lot of extra hours. So I definitely needed that extra help. So growing was definitely something that really helped me. I was able to buy time back.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I love, kind of you realizing that of like, I see it just a lot of people. That's always one of my biggest fears. Those people that are like, oh yeah, I'm quitting my day job and I'm just going to do real estate full time. Like, are you ready for that? Like, could you have just brought on somebody, or could you put some money
Yeah.
into it? So it's one of those things. So I think it's one of that, like scaling responsibly, I think is something
Right.
that is that term that I like to use for that. And I think you've done a great job at that. So, I got one more question for you here before we get you out of here. But so I know last time we talked, you were kind of in the process of selling off part of your portfolio, and looking to do some other things with it. So, what's some advice, or what's some tips for you that you have for people when they're like in that boat of like, hey, I've outgrown this part of my portfolio, or I'm done with this kind of class of neighborhood or whatever, and I'm ready to kind of move up. So, what's some advice you have for those people that are in that boat and they're looking to maybe sell off some of their portfolio to do something else?
Yeah. So uh, with the accidental flip that I did last year, I realized there's a lot of like profit margins by just buying low and selling high, right? And I noticed that across all my portfolio in different neighborhoods. And I've sold 2 properties recently So I didn't just want to go blindly by it. So right, so one flip got sold, and then realized, hey, can I do this on another house that I bought for cheap? So a duplex that I sold, I was all in at like 40K, and it was rented for 2 years, and then I decided to just list it, and somebody bought it for 90, and I haven't done a whole lot to it, but the demand's there. So if the demand's there, I realized, okay, so why not just monetize it? So I just picked the ones that were not my best rentals, because there's always the one rental that would always trouble you because of the tenants or whatever it is, the neighborhood it's in. Sometimes it's not just it's just the whole street that kind of like goes against you. So this one duplex that I had, it was a couple of blocks east of Irvington, where the whole neighborhood would decide to dump their mattresses and everything in my property. I don't know why they would do that, but they just kept doing it.
Yeah.
And the city kept sending me fines, and I would try to fire it out. But I'm like, at some point, I'm like, okay, I'm doing a service to Indianapolis, and I'll just take out the trash. I'll pay the price for it. But I paid 50 for it, and I ended up selling it for 105-ish.
Wow.
So yeah, so the market is there where there's a lot of demand for properties, especially duplexes. And I just decided that I just don't want to be in a certain neighborhood class where there's always a headache.
Yeah.
You do your best to keep the property clean, pick right tenants, but then there's some factors that are like you don't have control over.
Yeah. And did you sell those properties? Were they occupied when you sold them, or
they were occupied? Okay. Yeah, they were cash flowing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's awesome. So I've kind of been in that boat of like, I've just been like recently just picking up some with all the tenant issues and headaches that are kind of going on. Like I've been picking up properties that are occupied and kind of dealing with the tenant issues, figuring them out, and then selling them, because like, a vacant property right now is super, super valuable just because everything is, the inventory is just low across the board. So I didn't know if you were selling them occupied or vacant. So you can do both. It doesn't matter.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And there's demand for both. And one of the other reasons why I was trying to flip most of these properties this year is because of evictions.
Mm-hmm.
We cannot evict people. You couldn't evict people for the longest time earlier this year. And even now we cannot evict people.
Yeah.
So that was one of the other reasons why I decided to let go of some of my properties in my portfolio. So I think it's all about 12 doors.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, really appreciate it. Appreciate your time. Appreciate your insights. Just a great job, great interview and stuff. Is there anything else that you, any last tip or anything we didn't go over? You're like, oh man, yeah, I definitely, people need to be careful of this, or I've learned from this. Anything else that stands out in your mind?
I mean, once we dig into it, there's actually a lot more, but I don't know if there's like one tip that everybody has to keep in mind. But if I were to say, if somebody were to start out and ask me like, what would I do different? I think the one thing that I touched upon earlier was, instead of just buying a property that you can afford right now, it's okay to leverage some more and buy in a better area, because I think location eventually trumps everything.
Yeah. So I like it, buddy. I like it. So thank you so much for your time, like I said before. And with that is another episode of the Indy Investor Pod. Mihir, thank you so much. And we'll see you guys next time on the Indy Investor Pod. Take care.
Thanks for having me.